Hi guys, this is day 19 of the A2 Economics Revision Challenge, and today we're doing market failure. Guys, let's start. So when we look at market failure, we look at market failures in terms of externalities. There is externalities. There is what we call market power, where let's say one firm can become what we call a monopoly. There could also be a possibility of what we call imperfect information, which is a source of sort of market failure. Then there is what we call public goods, which we discussed in AS, but we're going to repeat our discussion here. And then we are looking at your merit and demerit goods, and sometimes there is a market failure in terms of factor immobility, or what we call time lags. Okay, so that's the total list of things that we're going to sort of discuss today in terms of our market failure. And let's start with externalities first. So when you look at externalities by definition are what we call our third party cost and benefits, right? So it's a third party cost or benefit. And the reason why it's a third party cost or benefit which causes a market failure is, we'll soon see, is this, that because it's a third party cost and benefit, the markets fail to recognize them, and because of this we will see either they could be under or over provision. So they could be under or over provision in the market because of the fact that there are externalities which were not accounted for. Before I move on to talk about those externalities, I want to talk about a scenario of no market failure, to understand first what is no market failure, and then let's put externalities which are of different kind, and then see whether there is under provision or over provision, and what are the examples of that. So let's start with the scenario of no market failure. Let's say there's a good out there which has no market failure. So if there is no market failure, we have, let's say, our prices here, right? Quantity is here, and let's say this is my demand and supply. If this is my demand and supply, there is no market failure. For us, demand is our marginal private benefit. Supply is our marginal private cost, and where the demand meets supply, we say marginal private benefit is equal to marginal private cost. Now, marginal private benefit is equal to, let me write this. This is called marginal private benefit. Similarly, we have what we call our marginal. This is our marginal private cost. Now, look at this, guys. Can I have 1 minute of attention? Look at this. When you see demand and supply are equal, your MPB equals MPC, and more importantly, the consumer surplus and the producer surplus both are maximized. So when demand meets supply, there is what we call let's call this A point at A. Yes, in a case of no market failure. I said no market failure. At A, which is equilibrium, demand equals supply, and there is no market failure. If there is no market failure in this market, then clearly our consumer surplus is equal and consumer surplus and producer surplus is maximized. Why do I say consumer surplus and producer surplus is maximized? Is the idea that अगर आप if you look at this point, for example, let me just choose a color. If you choose like this point here, right? If you under sort of produce here and don't go beyond, let's say Q naught. If that's the case, then you can see this: the marginal private benefit is more than the marginal private cost. If there is more benefit to the consumer than the producer, and as a result of this stopping here, the production level, this consumer surplus won't be realized, this producer surplus won't be realized. You are underproducing. A consumer is willing to pay much more. Remember, marginal private benefit is what you're willing to pay. You're willing to pay much more than the cost of making it, then of course you should make more of that good. In other words, whenever marginal benefit is more than marginal cost, you should always do more of that activity. Whenever marginal benefit is less than marginal cost, you should do less of that activity. And that's why at this point we say neither you're underproducing nor you're overproducing, and the consumer surplus, producer surplus is maximized. Markets are doing a great job. Why? Because the consumer surplus, producer surplus is maximized. Now let's look at a scenario where this does not happen. So we say this, that one reason why it does not happen is because of what we call externalities. When you look at externalities do this. We say if there is externality, marginal private benefit plus what we call externality will be equal to exactly marginal social cost. Similarly, marginal private cost plus externality will be equal to marginal social benefit. This is marginal social benefit and this is marginal social cost. In this scenario, in this diagram, guys, private cost and private benefit, because there was no externality, private benefit was equal to marginal social benefit and private cost was equal to marginal social cost. So what I'm saying is this, that if there is no externality, in a world of no externality, consumer surplus, producer surplus is maximized, but at the same time we need to understand this, that because there is no externality, your social benefit, society is also maximizing welfare. So your society is also doing fine because there is no externality. When there is externality, there is a divergence. The word that we are using, divergence between your social benefit and private benefit. Now social benefit will be not equal to private benefit, or social cost will not be equal to private cost, because there is externality. Make sense? So externality results in social cost to be not equal to private cost, social benefit to be not equal to private benefit, and that's why you might have a different view for yourself. You may say, you know what, I'm buying cigarettes, I'm pretty happy, marginal private benefit is maximized, but society may not be happy with your decision because there is a difference between your benefit and society's benefit, because now externalities have started to arise. Make sense? So when we look at externalities, let's just move on to externalities. When we look at externalities, externalities are also like of different kind. First of all, externalities can be basically of consumption and of production. Then they could be both positive and negative on both production and consumption side. So positive and negative. Are you all with me? So what I'm saying is that your externalities have basically four kinds. Two consumption side externalities, two production side externalities. One is positive, one is negative on consumption, and similarly positive and negative on production. So let's look at consumption side positive externality. A great example of this could be education, which is a consumption side positive externality. Consumption side negative externality is what we call cigarettes. Do you guys agree with me? So that's a consumption side negative externality. Here the demand should be more. Here demand should be less. We say this: marginal social benefit is more than marginal private benefit. And here I'm going to say marginal social benefit is less than marginal private benefit. And I'm going to say this, that because it's a positive consumption externality, demand should be more. And here in this case I will say this, that demand should be less. Make sense? Similarly, if demand should be more, I'm just saying, in other words, there is the key word that we need to use, there is what we call under provision, while in this case there is over provision. We'll see the diagrams in 1 minute, but that's what basically consumption side will look like. On the production side, guys, production side, when you look at positive sort of externality, that could be where the producer's product has not only benefited him but also the society. So, for example, if you're like a plant sort of nursery which sells plants and sort of flowers and all that, you're automatically making a private profit, but also in the process of making a private profit, your production process may lead to what we call a positive production externality, because there is more greenery, for example, there is more less pollution and so on and so forth, more oxygen and all that. So that means basically the marginal social cost, what the cost to society, will be lower than marginal private cost. There is a positive externality on the production side, and because of this we say supply should be more. And because supply should be more, the problem here would be of under provision. While in the case of negative externality, what we're going to say is this, that the negative production externality would be a producer who is dumping waste in the river, and that would be basically an example of a producer basically harming the environment. So that could be like polluting sort of firm, and where marginal social cost is greater than marginal private cost. What you're doing is this, that you are dumping your waste in a very irresponsible manner. If you properly dump it, your cost will be much more, but because you're not incurring that cost, you're putting it on the society. Let's say I dump the waste in the river needs to be cleaned now. That cost nobody is going to pay, but society will suffer because you are not doing something which is responsibly done. So in this case, what we say, that supply should be less, and that's why this is the case of what we call over provision. Over provision means either overproduction or overconsumption. Provision means to provide the good, and under means either under consumption or under production. This is a case of under provision because not enough consumption is happening. This is a case of under provision because not enough production is happening. So provision can be on the consumption side and production side, but it means to say basically, are we producing enough or not? Makes sense? Both of these are like cases of market failure. Now let's look at these four cases in terms of a diagram. We are kind of like overkilling our externality, to be honest, because you will not be asked about so many cases and so on. But I'm just sort of thinking from a perspective of our essay MCQs or essays, for example. You may write more if you have more knowledge about it. So on the consumption side, if I want to sort of make a positive consumption externality, the diagram would look like this. Once you get a hang of the couple of diagrams, we know how all the 4 cases will look like. So this is a case of a positive consumption externality. So if this is my demand and supply, let's say of education or of schooling, price is P naught, quantity is Q naught. Demand is my marginal private benefit, supply is my marginal private cost. Consumer surplus, producer surplus, is it maximized? And the answer is maybe. But what about what is the socially desirable level of output? And the answer is this, that your marginal social benefit exceeds the marginal private benefit, because MSB is equal to MPB plus positive externality. Because of this positive externality, your demand should be here. You should demand more than what you're demanding right now. And that's why this area, Q0 minus Q1, is what we call our under provision. This is not the producer's problem or the school problem that demand isn't enough. The society isn't demanding enough. And if the demand should be here, which means quantity should be here. So this is the case of what we call a positive consumption externality, where if in the marginal benefit I add the positive externality, the social benefit would say demand the yellow curve. Therefore, this much is what we call our under provision. How do we solve this problem? If you are a policy maker, what can you do to solve this problem? One is your information asymmetry that happens, because of which you are under. Anything else that you can do as a policy maker? Give a subsidy. Awesome. When you give a subsidy, guys, can I have 1 minute of attention, please? Look at this. If I give a subsidy equal to this much, remember the vertical distance is the amount of the subsidy, automatically your supply curve will come here. And automatically you not only make education affordable, but also you can get the desired quantity. So how can government solve the problem? Give a subsidy. Okay, so that's where it happens. Is this a private good? Yes, of course, education is a private good, right? Healthcare is a private good, but it is merit in nature. It's a private good. So when you look at government policy of reducing 20% fee, is that a great move? And the answer is, they put a price control here. They thought, this is what will happen. You put a price control. Look at this, guys. This is where economic policy is at work. आपने बोला कि यार Q1 करना है quantity, let's make education affordable. Rather than giving a subsidy, you said let's put a maximum price. This is 100. You said 80 will be now be the price. What will happen in the future? Some schools will close down. And what will happen? A lot more people will be like, oh wow, now let's go to schools. More demand than supply, you might have a shortage happening. At least that's what economic theory suggests. Maybe it may happen, maybe it may not happen. So if you're getting excited about 20% reduction, some schools will close down. Maybe your siblings may not go to school now, because you guys are done with schools, right? Okay. The next thing we want to talk about is basically, let's look at a case of what we call, let's look at a case of another kind of like a externality, which is your negative production externality. In the negative production externality, the producer is causing an externality on the supply side of negative nature. So here the diagram will look like this. So let's say demand and supply is like this. Price is P naught, quantity is Q naught, right? Demand is my marginal private benefit, supply is my marginal private cost. A good example of negative production externality would be a producer who is dumping waste in the river. If he's doing so, your marginal social cost is more than the marginal private cost. So marginal social cost is equal to marginal private cost plus negative externality. Remember guys that when the supply curve shifts to the left, cost of production goes up. This is like the cost to the society is more than the cost to the individual producer. And therefore, the price should be much more, but more importantly, the quantity should be Q1. If he starts to sort of dispose waste properly, he will end up producing not Q0 but Q1. And that's why this is what we call over provision. Does that make sense, guys? Now, this over provision means what? The government is basically has to intervene in this case too. How can the government intervene? And the answer is by taxing. By taxing equal to negative externality. If the government doesn't intervene, there is a market failure of over provision. But there's an important concept that we need to understand, which is called the dead weight loss. The dead weight loss of this over provision is simply that, or at Q0, can I have 1 minute of attention from everyone? At Q0, this is the private cost, this is the social cost. This quantity, there is no externality, right? If I look at this, let's call it point C. At C, there is no externality. But at A, there is an externality equal to A to B, which means all this vertical distance between the two, between your private costs and your social costs, private benefit and the social cost is basically your externality, because private benefit is equal to marginal social benefit. There is no externality on the demand side, but there is a difference between social cost and the private social benefit and the social cost, and this distance is your negative externality. Look at this, guys. Going back to this diagram, at your Q0, this is the amount of positive externality you have caused. But at this point, Q1, there is no positive externality because this is socially desirable level. So all of this means you are not taking advantage of the positive externality. The closer you go towards Q1, the smaller the externality, because you are nearing the socially desirable level. जितना आप दूर जाएंगे इससे, the more the gap between social cost and social benefit will go up. Look at this now. This is the demand side, right? So marginal private cost is equal to marginal social cost. The schools are not causing any externality, but the externality is actually a demand side externality. So social benefit and social cost. So how do you get the dead weight loss? In exams you will be asked this in MCQs. How do you get the dead weight loss? At the original quantity, find the gap between the social benefit and the social cost, and then that makes the triangle of the dead weight loss. On my old quantity, I extended the line upward and I found my dead weight loss. At this quantity, there is no dead weight loss. So therefore, what is dead weight loss? Some consumers or some producers could have benefited and they are not benefiting. So the first kind of failure that we want to talk about is externalities. It's taken a long discussion, but externalities are important. Externality results in over and under provision, and externality results in dead weight losses if you do not produce the right quantity. Next discussion we want to have is what we call, which we did it in AS as well, it's called the merit and demerit goods. With merit goods, we say there is an information failure and there is also something else happening, which is what we call there is a positive consumption externality. What's the information failure that happens in the case of merit goods? The benefit of the good will happen in the future, but the cost is incurred today. Your coming to this class, attending this class is a cost to you guys. Like lack of sleep, boring content, like social time away from phone, time away from WhatsApp, and all that's a cost to you guys, right? So the social cost, the cost that you incur in today, but the benefit may happen tomorrow. Let's say in August you get the grade and so on, and you get to your universities and blah blah blah. So because the cost is incurred today, but benefit may happen tomorrow or later, whenever that tomorrow comes. When tomorrow comes is movie, right? Happen later. The idea will be that you may end up underspending, you may end up understudying. You'll be like, what? Who cares about CIA? Who cares about going to universities? Who cares about future? Like that kind of a feeling. I hope that feeling is not happening right now. So both of these reasons is why there is what we call under consumption. So we say the merit goods have a problem of positive consumption externality, which we just saw, that marginal social benefit is greater than marginal private benefit. For example, health and education is a great example of a merit good. The benefit that you get from education is that not only you get educated, but you will become more productive. There will be higher income for the economy. There will also be more tax revenue for the economy. There will also be better decision making for the economy, and so on and so forth. So you benefit the economy as well as yourself. Similarly, healthcare has the same kind of a benefit. On the other hand, when you look at demerit goods have a problem of, again, information failure, where the benefit may happen today, but the cost is incurred tomorrow. So benefit today, like a cigarette, gives you the high today, but the cost may happen tomorrow, which means, I don't know, some health concerns and so on and so forth. And it may happen so much later that you don't even know whether it will happen or not, and so on. So that's one problem that happened. Also, there is a negative consumption externality. What's the negative consumption externality? You not only harm yourself, but also you are harming society in terms of passive smoking, in terms of higher health expenditure, and so on and so forth. So this is your case of overconsumption. And that's why in this case, government in terms of policy may put taxes, and in this case government should give subsidies. Like policy measure, if you want to look at merit versus demerit good, because the demand is too less, the demand is too much. So this is a negative consumption externality where marginal social benefit is less than marginal private benefit. Got it, guys? So that's the second point that we want to discuss, which is linked to externalities, but this has information failure as well. And information failure, the only way we can solve the problem of information failure is through information dissemination, providing more information and providing more education. Remember in AS we showed a data where we saw how college graduates in the US were not smoking post a 1970 report which said that smoking is harmful. So if you look at data in the 60s of those who go to college and those who do not go to college, there is no difference between them in terms of smokers. a college graduate is just as likely to smoke as a college school dropout. But if you look at data now, only 15% of college graduates end up smoking. They don't smoke. Smoking is uncool now. It's no longer the cool thing anymore. So if you are smoking, remember this, you're doing something completely uncool. Not going with the global trends. You should not be smoking. If you go to college. If you don't go to college, you can smoke. Because 70 to 80% of those who do not go to college end up smoking. That is what, no, I should say, or those who smoke, 70 to 80% of them actually smoke. Actually do not go to college. So if you are a college dropout, smoke. If you're not a college dropout, if you're a college graduate, it's not cool. Take up something else, something more cooler. Okay, I'm recording this, I don't know why. That I want to talk about, the third thing that I want to talk about is something called let me just go back to the list. The third thing we want to talk about is called public goods. Public goods we have discussed as well earlier. What are public goods? Well, public goods are basically has a feature of non-rival and non-excludable. Non-rival means basically consumption by one person will not leave less for another. A great example of this could be street light. Somebody uses a street light, does it leave less for another? And the answer is no. And because of this, if there is consumption doesn't go down, this means that there is no problem of it being reduced because of your consumption. Similarly, national defense is a case of a non-rival good, because no matter how many people come to your country, it won't reduce. It should not reduce the protection that national defense gives you. Similarly, non-excludable means basically it is not possible to exclude non-payers. Non-payers are those who do not want to pay. So, for example, if one street light is provided, nobody can be forced to pay for it. Once national defense is provided, nobody will be forced to pay for it. And because of this non-excludable nature, although people want this good, people want street light, people want sort of national defense, people want, for example, your lighthouse, yet there is what we call no willingness to pay. And that willingness to pay means basically, why is there no willingness to pay? Because what we say, there is a free rider problem. Free rider problem says this, that because it's non-excludable, no one wants to pay for the good. If no one wants to pay for the good, that basically means that once the good is provided, you can't be charged for it. And that's the case of all your public goods. And therefore, in the case of merit and demerit goods, there was a case of under and over provision. In the case of public goods, we call it a market failure because there is no provision. So this is again a quantity issue, that this good will not be produced at all because nobody wants to pay for it. What does the government do in this case? To provide it themselves. So this is where what we call government does what we call direct provision by the government. Somebody said, you know what, but taxpayers are paying for these goods, and the answer is that even if you're not a taxpayer, you'll still get the good. And you don't even, like, let's say if I'm a taxpayer and the road outside my house is broken, can I go to the government and say, hey, I pay taxes, can you fix my road? And they'll be like, you know what, buzz off. Because when your number will come, then we will be fixing your road, or maybe we will not never be fixing your road. Does that make sense? I can't force the government to fix my road just because I pay taxes. So that's what it is. So we don't say you pay through your taxes for these goods. Okay? Are we good? The fourth market failure, is what we call market power. Market power means basically we're looking at a case of monopoly. We saw in the chapter for monopoly that monopoly ends up producing less than socially desirable quantity, right? Or less than the quantity that is good for both consumer surplus and producer surplus to maximize. The diagram that we draw is that demand curve is downward sloping. Your marginal demand curve is here, your marginal revenue is below that, your your marginal cost is upward sloping. Now, if this market was perfect competition, demand, this is also supply under perfect competition. So if this market was perfectly competitive, the price would be PC, the quantity will be QC. But because this market has a monopoly, monopoly produces where MC equals MR. So monopoly produces at this point, therefore they end up producing QM and the price will be PM. So because of this higher price and lower quantity, because MC is equal to MR is being done here, profit is maximized here, we are ending up with a case of a deadweight loss equal to this area. So what we say is that the monopoly, let me write this, monopoly charges a higher price and produces a lower quantity, causing deadweight loss of area, let's call it ABC. So there is a deadweight loss of area ABC because the monopoly is underproducing and overcharging. How do we fix this problem? And we saw a lot of things that we did in our discussion. Maybe control pricing, maybe what we could do is break down monopoly or have laws and regulations in place or something like that which can make the monopoly to not operate. Number 5 is quickly about information failure. You know, like if there's a lack of information, there will be a problem of consumers and producers to suffer. So there is a lot of examples of information failure, but let's say if firms or consumers do not have the information, then they may end up taking wrong decisions. So for example, let's say if you're a consumer and you do not know the true sort of benefit of the good, you may under demand that good or you may under consume that good. Similarly, as a producer, if you do not know the true sort of benefit of that good, your pricing may go wrong. So consumers and producers also do not fully disclose information. Let's say if I'm a consumer, I'm going to buy insurance and they ask me, do you smoke? My answer will be, I don't smoke. Because even if I smoke, I would not say that because I know that my premium will go up. They will charge me a higher premium. Similarly, for example, if I'm getting insurance for my car and they ask me, are you a safe driver or a risky driver? They don't ask that question because they don't ask this question because they know everyone lies. So I'm not going to say, oh, I'm a very dangerous driver. I would want to be Michael Schumacher or whatever. I'm not going to give that information. But people hide information. Buyers and sellers hide information because I don't tell my producer what my willingness to pay is. Why? Because I know if I get a lower price, I'll pocket consumer surplus. Nobody tell anyone what their willingness to pay is. But what we say is that because of lack of information, they could be under or over sort of provision of the good, or under or over sort of production of the goods and so on. Makes sense? So information failure happens in externalities in terms of merit and demerit goods cases, but information failure can also happen where people are hiding their information. One of the biggest things that you notice, like when you're about to buy a second-hand car, let's say it is a brand new car, as soon as it gets sold and gets out of the showroom, it loses value. even if it's like a little driven, like 5 kilometer driven, which is nothing, the nobody will pay you the same price as the one which is in the showroom. That's the rule, because the idea is that there is so much information failure, people will be like, you know what, there must be something wrong with the car, and that's why they will never pay you the same price. So that's how it is. The last thing we want to talk about, number 6, is basically what we call time lags. Time lags, or sometimes even immobility of labor. We saw when there is immobility of labor, that could be geographical immobility or occupational immobility, there will be what we call shortages that can happen. Similarly, time lags, we saw in fiscal and monetary policy, time lags does not let the policy to become effective, it become too late, and it may end up doing too much or too little when the time is causing it to become effective. So that sometimes time lags also result in disequilibrium and the market doesn't clear itself. So all of this are basically market failures. Now, next discussion one we will have is basically how does government fix these market failures, and also one more discussion is the cost benefit analysis.